Okay, so Indy Johar, why is the maker movement such a well? Tell me about there are three parts to this paper, or three dimensions that you've described. Why do you think there is why is there a moment of opportunity for manufacturing in Europe and in the world at the moment?
I think, in a way, manufacturing is in the middle of a kind of revolution. And the revolution has kind of three stages to it. Everyone talks about the kind of Industrial Revolution 2.0, but actually the real advantage is at a systems level. It's not the fact that they're makers individually, it's the system of makers that is built. And the interoperability. So somebody who shares an open source piece of product creates a commons for that product to be used, adapted and iterated. It's that commons infrastructure that we're starting to create around manufacturing. So people often talk about the individual product, and products are what they are, but actually it's the interoperability, and you'll see the complexity of these things start to get richer and more innovative. So it's how do we create new types of clusters, open clusters, when these clusters aren't just about proximity in an old-fashioned way, but actually about interoperability in a more advanced way. So what does APIs look like? What does insurance look like in this system? What does attribution look like in this system? What does risk look like? How do you assemble a system like this? How do you attribute the complexity of supply chains and insurance risk across those? These are all open questions. So I think we're at the beginning of a new journey at that point. Then also we're actually at the beginning of a journey of really starting, many of the corporate manufacturers themselves, starting to understand how actually their balance sheets, their value is attributed to actually being able to access and being influenced by social risk. So social and environmental risk are increasingly understood by manufacturers, because whether it's access to resource or access to human capital, actually their infrastructure is. So we're no longer able to see the private manufacturers, purely private, more and more interdependent, whether it's supply chain risk and supply chain context. It's not just the supply chain, but the social economic context of that supply chain. So this idea of the segregation of the public and the private is becoming increasingly blurry. So we're coming to this new idea of shared wealth and shared wealth infrastructure. And I think manufacturing will change as it has to start to reinvent its responsibility to the context of its supply chain, not just its supply chain. So in a way that puts together the second part of the really important part of the presentation. And then the third part of the presentation really starts to open up this conversation about actually the pure commons infrastructure that we really start to see, and how we build the institutional architecture of this. And I think these are again open conversations. Organizations like E3 and blockchain are starting to create a whole new institutional infrastructure. How we do that, how we organize it, will be another kind of real powerful journey in the story. So I think in Europe we are at the beginning of a different conversation. And why this is possible in Europe is because actually we mustn't forget we have the greatest history on democracy at the system level. Actually we have the infrastructure that supports individuals, and I mean individuals from a person level, interoperability. We have a city infrastructure which actually can become a very powerful economic engine. So we have many of the conditions to allow for this new manufacturing ecosystems to emerge, and in an emergent sense have influence.
So for the European Union, this presents an opportunity for its future agenda.
Yeah.
What are the sort of three things that you would like the Union itself to be doing in order to support your idea of making good for the future?
I think one of the key things is inventing and investing into the institutional architecture of this stuff. I think unless we can start to reinvent what insurance looks like, what consumer rights look like in this micro-attributed assembly mechanisms, I think we will not deliver on the full ambition of this infrastructure. And I think if you look at most of the innovations that are going on around the institutional infrastructure of this stuff, they are largely hacks. And at best they're bypasses, i.e. Legal letters saying we have no culpability. And unless we can build the institutional infrastructure, this economy will go nowhere. So like every age invests in a new class of institutional infrastructure. If we're going to talk about a democratized, decentralized manufacturing economy, then we have to create the institutional architecture which preserves rights and responsibilities. And we can't fall into an Uberification trap, where actually this becomes a method to instrumentalize, where platforms become mechanisms of instrumentalizing the weak and the few. So how do we reinvent the union? How do we reinvent, which is about labour organisation on platforms and the asymmetries of platforms? How do we reinvent insurance? How do we reinvent customer rights and consumer rights? I think we have to think from the institutional level. And I know it sounds boring, but I think that would be the greatest contribution for me that European Union could do, is really talk about reinventing. Not about adoption, it's not about just hacking these things. It's actually genuinely thinking what 21st century models could look like and reinventing them fundamentally. What could a contract look like, which is a coded contract? What could actually ethics look like in these sort of systems? I think that's the scale of innovation required. And I think that's going to, the rest, physical infrastructure, how they're all coming. Actually, there's enough. I think you can do lots of seed programs around setting up ecosystems, around open manufacturing ecosystems, which is, I think, going to be key. But actually, the real work, the hard work, is there. And I think that would be the greatest contribution.
Indy Johar, thank you.
Pleasure.